Well, the High Court in Pretoria has thrown out an application by the defence for 4 of the accused in the Senzo Meyiwa case for a trial within a trial. Adv Malesela Teffo wanted the court to first deal with the alleged confessions that the state had obtained from accused 1 and 2 before the matter continued. Teffo accused the police of assaulting the 2 while they were held at police stations following their arrest. Judge Tshifhiwa Maumela ruled that there wasn't a substantive case made by Teffo. Judge Maumela ruled that the issue around the confessions could only be heard after the state had advanced the version to the court. Teffo also wanted the court to halt the cross-examination of the current witness. However, Maumela ruled that the defence for accused number 5, Advocate Zandile Mshololo, should be allowed to continue. The state's first witness, Sergeant Adv Malesela, is under cross-examination for a 3rd week. Malesela has been giving testimony on the forensic and physical evidence he collected from the scene where the soccer star was shot in 2014. Questions around the handling of the crime scene have been raised. Right, court proceedings have wrapped up for the day at the High Court in Pretoria, where the trial of soccer star Senzo Meyiwa is being heard. Of course, for our latest update, let's cross to our senior reporter, Chriselda Lewis, who has been, of course, covering this story for us. A very good afternoon to you, Chriselda. Of course, the wishes for a trial within a trial by Advocate Teffo, that ruled out of the game. What more can you tell us about today's proceedings, and perhaps take us through the highlights of today?
Well, that's certainly where proceedings had started this morning, Flo. You would recall that we had expected that the defence representing accused 1 to 4 would want to bring that special plea for a trial within a trial, because Advocate Malesela Teffo believes that his clients, accused 1 and 2, had been forced into confessions, and says that they were severely assaulted and that police had unconstitutionally obtained those confessions from his client, also saying that his clients were never read their rights. That was forming part of the basis of this special plea or trial within a trial that he wanted. There was certainly no, agreement amongst the legal representatives together with the state this morning, where after a meeting inside the judges' chambers, they came back. Advocate Zandile Mshololo wanted to proceed with her cross-examination of the state's first witness, Adv Malesela, as well as the state prosecutor, Advocate George Baloy, indicating that he did not see cause why that special plea should be heard now. In fact, it could be done after Advocate Zandile Mshololo, who represents accused number 5, is done with her cross-examination. Let's take a listen to what the judge said in handing down that ruling on why that special plea for a trial within a trial cannot be heard now.
After listening to Advocate Teffo, after listening to Advocate Mshololo and Advocate Baloy, the court orders that Advocate Mshololo continues with cross-examination. The court is very open to a possibility that immediately after we deal with Sergeant Malesela, we will be watching the space in terms of what Advocate Baloy does or does not do. If whatever he does includes an attempt, or no, not an attempt, an endeavor to bring on board any confessions, this court shall deem the space and the time to be convenient for anybody to react, however vehemently, to that endeavor to bring confessions on board, which he will be seeking to rely upon for purposes of this trial.
Flo, Masia's expertise also came into question inside this court today when asked what basic training he had to qualify as a forensic detective. He indicated that in 2008, Masia said he did a basic forensic course, and in 2013 he finished training and he was accredited as a criminalistic expert. He got a criminalistic, qualified as a criminalistic expert and got a certificate for that. And what the advocate Zandile Mshololo was trying to point to was that he did not have the expertise. He was not qualified enough because she questioned at the time if he had the certificate, if he had required basic training, why he didn't do some of the basic investigations that were supposed to be conducted at the scene. Let's take a listen.
But do you say that based on the training that you had received, based on this training that you had received, you were supposed to continue with the investigation at the crime scene because you are knowledgeable now?
Are ho ya ka thupello e o no sontse o na le yona, o na le maiphihlelo a yona, o no o loketse hore o ka tswela pele ka o etsa diphuputso sebakeng seo sa ketsahala.
And therefore you're leaving the crime scene when you were supposed to continue with the investigation was unjustified.
Jwale ho bolela hore ho tlohela sebaka sa ketsahalo ha hao ha wa etsahala ka tsela e hantle.
Mosebetsing re sebetsa ka protocol. Re tla tlameha ho latela melao e re fuwang mosebetsing.
At work we had to follow a certain protocol, and there are rules that always guide us as we are executing our duties.
Flo, you'd also recall that earlier on last week, there was also a testimony inside this court that Masia had not taken swabs of gunshot residue from the hands of those who were inside the house when Senzo Meyiwa was shot and killed. What we also heard in court here today is that he also didn't test for any blood or blood spatter inside the car of Senzo Meyiwa, which was on the scene when Masia had arrived. And you must recall, this is quite important because Advocate Zandile Mshololo says the allegation is that Senzo Meyiwa was bleeding. So that was also the car that was used to transport him to the hospital, and questioned him as to why he did not test for any blood or look for blood spatter inside the vehicle that was used to transport Senzo Meyiwa to hospital. Let's take a listen.
It is alleged that the deceased was bleeding. I'm not sure if you know that, but my question is going to the deceased car that you found inside at the crime scene. Did you go and inspect deceased car if there were any blood stains inside there?
Hono ho so ho lotile hore mofu o ne a tswa madi haholo. Jwale potso e latelang ke hore na koloi ya mofu o ile wa ya ho yona hore o lo sheba hore na madi a fumanwe ka hare ho koloi eo? No, I did not.
Okay.
Cha angizange ngiyeke ngiyobheka imoto yakhe umufi ukuthi kambe inegazi.
And the deceased car was at the crime scene at the first time when you arrived, is that correct?
Kgetlo la pele ha o fihla sebakeng sa ketsahalo koloi ya mofu e ne sentse e le sebakeng seo na ho jwalo? That is correct.
And also, just before we adjourned for the day, Flo, what was taking centre stage inside this court?
When my mother was asking that why Mapiri was tidying up, she responded that she doesn't want people to see that they were drinking.
All All right, and lastly, Flo, part of what took centre stage just before we adjourned for the day was that the statements from various neighbours that were taken were also showed to us here inside court, in which some of the neighbours who responded to the scene after Senzo Meyiwa had been killed, I beg your pardon, indicate that some neighbours, or a neighbour in fact by the name of Maggie Phiri, had been cleaning the house even before Musia had arrived. One of the statements indicating that beer bottles were being taken from the floor. There were quite a number of beer bottles from what we're hearing that statement does contain, and that there had been some cleaning up that had taken place at the scene before Musia had arrived, and he concedes as well and agrees that possibly could have taken place. Let's take a listen to that clip.
All right, it seems you're having a problem with that particular clip, Chriselda, but while we wait for the team to sort that out, I mean, it does seem as though, and we discussed this quite briefly last week, that what is being put into question at the moment on the surface seems to be that of negligence and possibly incompetence of the police. But it does seem as though we're working towards talking about a cover-up. I mean, when you're talking about that there was cleaning being done and that was ignored, the fact that a car that transported the deceased was not even checked for blood spatter or blood stains or anything, it does seem as though we're getting to that point that you rightly said last week might be where we're going.
And that's certainly, Flo, what the defence wants to do. The defence wants to show this court that that crime scene had been contaminated, that crime scene had been tampered with. In fact, a word that was used by Advocate Zandile Mshololo inside this court here today, indicating that some evidence had been planted there. So what the defence is trying to show at this particular point was that even at the time that the first forensic detective had arrived on the scene, that he had arrived after it had been cordoned off, and there was no indication in terms of what the occupants in that house would have done prior to his arrival. Remember, as I indicated, this is not the first instance that we're hearing of this. Previously, when we heard from Musia that he didn't take swabs of gunshot residue in the house to establish if any of the occupants had pulled the trigger, we're also hearing now that he had also taken photographs on the second visit to the crime scene, blood spatter that had been on the walls in the kitchen and also near the TV stand in the lounge area, in the sitting room area. So we're hearing that, in the first instance, he argues to say that he did not take photographs on the very first day because he was waiting for the crime scene task team to arrive to assist him with the crime scene. But what the defense is basically pointing to here is that police did very little to secure the scene where Senzo Meyiwa was killed. And even the evidence that they took, they didn't properly store it, and they had arrived a little too late while people had been seen picking bottles from the crime scene, as well as cleaning. We understand that some water had been found on the floor. One of those witnesses who gave a statement said she was quite perturbed by what she had seen, and when she had asked Maggie Phiri was the name that was brought up in court, why she was cleaning up and picking up the bottles from the floor, the alcohol bottles, she had basically said she didn't want police to see that the occupants in the house had been drinking. So a clear indication at this stage in terms of where the defense is going, and Musia doesn't seem to have a reasonable explanation about the fact that he had arrived a little too late, and by the time he arrived the crime scene had been cordoned off, and there had been some tampering of that particular scene when Senzo Meyiwa was killed.
All right, thanks as always, Chriselda Lewis, our senior reporter. Great reporting for us there at the Senzo Meyiwa murder trial for us.